While talking about the literature history in the first chapter of his book, Eagleton examines the notion of sociology of literature. Now, sociology of literature has to be understood. What is this exactly? And this notion of sociology of literature was very much prevalent in the West. Prevalent means something which existed predominantly. And Terry Eagleton defines this process which deals with literary production, distribution, and exchange in particular society. This has to be understood. This this is called sociology of literature. He defines sociology of literature as the process which deals with literary production, the way literature is produced, means literary works are produced, distributed, the way they are distributed through marketing and all, and exchange in particular society. So this process is referred to as sociology of literature. And this also focuses on the publication of books, author status, and the reader's literacy. These two things are involved in it. First of all, the way the author produces, distributes, and exchanges the literature. And the publication of book is also one of aspect of discussion under sociology of literature. The author's status and the reader's literacy also matter. So sociology of literature is one of the important aspects of Marxist criticism. Who reads? Who writes? So that is one of the important aspect of discussion. So this deals with explaining of a literary work more fully. This study also includes the study of form, style, and meaning of literary works. Okay, so under sociology of literature, Eagleton not only talks about the production of literature, but also the publication, author status, and at the same time, the form and style and meaning of literary works are also taken into consideration. We are familiar with base and superstructure. In yesterday's lecture, I talked about this ideology. Superstructure is an ideology. And Karl Marx uses the metaphor from architecture to talk about the social relations, the class relations. And he uses the term base and superstructure. Superstructure is every kind of social, cultural behavior, every kind of idea that we live. It has some base. So Eagleton begins his discussion with the Marxist metaphor, base and superstructure. Marx argues that productive force and social relation form the economic structure of a society. Okay, the productive force means those who are involved in production and social relation form the economic structure of a society. And this economic structure was called base. The economic structure is the base. And from this base emerges superstructure, ideology. Superstructure comprises certain forms of social consciousness. Means I told you, the religion that we follow, the ethical values that we talk about, aesthetic theory means whatever literary theory, aesthetic theory that we talk about is a kind of superstructure, and it comes from the base. It emerges from the base. Further, Marx was of the opinion that the ruling class uses this form of superstructure to legitimize its mode of economic production. The ruling class uses religion, ethical values, aesthetic theories, and any other superstructure, any other form to legitimize, means to give it a legal status, to make it more acceptable by law. So the ruling class uses this form, religion, etc. One of the examples I'm giving, to legitimize its mode of economic production, to give it legal status. You see advertisements. Now, advertisements are kind of superstructures only. They are used to legitimize the mode of economic production of the ruling class. Whatever they produce should become acceptable. For example, these days, the medical field, the pharmaceutical field is coming up with different kind of immunity boosters, etc. So you can understand how they try to legitimize their mode of economic production. And Marx called this as the strategy of ruling class ideology. Superstructure is legitimized by using different modes of economic production, and this is a strategy of ruling class ideology. This is how ruling class imposes its ideology on others. Then he talks about the relation between base and superstructure. Again, is in relation to art. Art and literature are part of this superstructure. As we say, religion is a superstructure, a form of superstructure. Culture is a form of superstructure, which has the base of economic structure. Then art and literature are also part of the superstructure. They are product of the complex relation between base and superstructure. They come out of this relationship. Therefore, if we want to understand literature, we must understand it as part of the total social process. We need to understand that, how it is a part of the social process. And this is where ideology works through literature. And it is a criticism that has a role to discover it. Literature works like this, and it is the role of the criticism to discover how literature works through certain ideology, or ideology, sorry, works through certain literary work. Now, Eagleton gives an example to illustrate his point. He said, take the example of King Lear, then the Dunciad, and Ulysses. These are some of the famous works. He argues that it is not enough to interpret the symbols in these works to study their literary history and the footnotes about sociological facts related to them. That is not enough. It is important to study the complex relations between these works and the world they represent. Means he is talking about uh, King Lear by William Shakespeare, and Dunciad and Ulysses are the Greek works. How the society is reflected, how the world they represent. Okay, this relation between the works and the world they represent has to be understood through literary criticism. So it is the role of a criticism. Further, Eagleton asserts the importance of Marxist study of literature. Means this study must not be restricted to socio-economic and historical analysis. Means Marxist study should also take into account the artistic, aesthetic aspects. Further, he explains this with the examples of, Nostromo. Let me tell you what it is exactly. It's a novel by Joseph Conrad. He gives an example of Joseph Conrad. I'm sorry. So this is a novel, and he gives an example of Nostromo and interprets the famous Placido Gulf scene in the form of Marxist point of view. In this particular novel, there is Placido Gulf scene, and Eagleton interprets this from Marxist point of view. So he thinks that it is a brief but brilliant piece of Marxist criticism. He gives an example of the isolation of Descartes and Nostromo in this work. This can be Descartes and Nostromo are the characters from the novel. And the isolation of these two characters in this work can be seen as a symbol of pessimism in the mind of the author. Pessimism is the negative approach, the loss of hope. According to Eagleton, it is an ideological pessimism. And this is the worldview of Western bourgeois, of whom the author Conrad was one. The author Joseph Conrad represents the Western bourgeois class. I mentioned what bourgeois is. Bourgeois is the capitalist society, the ruling class, and Joseph Conrad represents this ruling class. And this pessimism represented through the character of Descartes and Nostromo is the worldview of the Western bourgeois. So this is how he explains the relation between base and superstructure through the example of Nostromo.